Serious. When was a time you legitimately thought you were going to die? Story 1. This happened about 4 or 5 months ago. I was home alone eating steak tip kebabs for dinner. My wife was at work and due home in about an hour, and I choked on one of the pieces of steak. Chew thoroughly, people. At first, I thought I just needed to swallow harder. Bad idea, as now it was firmly lodged in my throat. I tried coughing it up, punching myself in the stomach and pulling it out with my hand, none of which helped. I then ran over to the kitchen and tried to wash it down with some water. The water just sat in a pool in my mouth and my throat was completely blocked. At this point, I contemplated calling 911, but I knew I'd be long dead before they'd arrive. The thought of my wife, we just celebrated our first anniversary and recently decided to start trying to conceive, coming home to find my dead body was by far the scariest part. I remember looking at my cats, but they just stared at me, confused at my odd behavior. Eventually, I reached what felt like my whole hand down my throat and pulled a chunk of the obstruction out. This loosened it enough to let me cough out the remainder. I was so close to passing out and vomit everywhere. The total time in the throat is around 90 seconds. I couldn't talk for a day due to the physical trauma on my throat, drove myself to the hospital, cried in front of my wife when I saw her. The next few days were surreal. It was like I was living in an alternate timeline. I don't find choking gags in movies and TV amusing anymore. I still have mild PTSD about it. Story 2. Woke up immediately wide awake in the middle of the night without moving and the hair standing up on the back of my neck because my now ex-wife was standing in our bedroom holding a large kitchen knife and staring at my feet. She had had a schizophrenic break a few months earlier and had started referring to me as the enemy. I lay there without moving. She stood over there for an hour. I have no idea how long she was there before I woke up. Anyway, she leaves the room and comes back without the knife, gets into bed and cuddles in little spoon style like she made a decision. Then she made me waffles for breakfast. Best believe I put on my best, "Oh wow, amazing wife, these waffles are yum" voice. Story 3. Back in July, I was riding my motorcycle and was turning into my driveway. A girl came from behind me around a sharp turn and T-boned me. She was going at least 60 miles per hour up until a couple of seconds before impact when she hit her brakes. She hit me because she was either texting or dicking around with something in her car. Either way, she just wasn't paying attention. I remember hearing tires screeching and seeing the car half a second before impact and everything went black. I broke the windshield with my head, broke the mirror with my hip, then landed face first on the road. I do remember being scared because I wasn't sure if there were more cars, so adrenaline kicked in and I caught myself with my hands and knees and pushed myself to my feet to run off the road. That's where I regained my vision. The bike was totaled, but thanks to my helmet and pure rage at being hit, I managed to literally walk away with only a concussion, nasty bruises, and a deep bone bruise on my left foot, no broken bones at all. It's been around 8 months and I'm still recovering from the concussion. My toe barely hurts and the leg that took the impact has a dent in the muscle, but other than that, I'm fine. If I wouldn't have been wearing a helmet, then I have no doubt that I would be dead right now. Wear your damn helmets, kids. Story 4. Very recently, I had some kind of super fast virus or illness. Not sure what it was, but it basically started off with me feeling an incredible sense of impending doom, which I know was a sign of panic attacks. But I don't get panic attacks, and that feeling lasted until I started getting cold. Usually I'm way too warm, but this time I had to bundle up, but that didn't work and even getting into bed didn't help. I started shivering so hard my muscles began to tighten and it was so painful I had to jump into the shower to stop it, but before I could get in, I started getting lightheaded and had to lie down on the floor. It was like everything was spinning, and then I had the urge to poo and puke at the same time. Not being able to think clearly, I get into the tub in an attempt to do both just in case. And at that moment, I couldn't stand or coordinate properly, shivering, lightheaded, and about to poo and puke. I thought to myself I must be about to die and this is how I'll be found. I ended up puking first, felt better enough to poop in the proper place, and then showered to stop the shivering. After all of that, it was like nothing happened and I was better again. Story 5. So this is funny, but also serious and disgusting, so I hope you have a strong stomach. I was sick, pooping my brains out, intense cramps, blood, vomit, migraines for days. It got to the point I was pooping water, like crystal clear water, and I thought I was poisoned somehow. Severely dehydrated as every fluid I drank just went through me like a funnel or came back up minutes later. I stuck to water because it wasn't as gross as curdled milk. I lived on the toilet. One day I was sitting there sick as hell, my new normal or so I thought. I started physically heating up, had heart palpitations, turned pale, fainted, and fell off the toilet still pooping and vomiting. Fortunately, I fell just right, so I didn't choke on my own vomit. And when I came to, still feeling faint, I'd taken my surroundings there on the floor. There's pink butt water on my wall, laundry basket, and half the floor seeping under me. There's vomit, basically just stomach acid and water at this point, on the other half of my floor and all over half my head. I was home alone, my parents were working, and my brother was asleep, and he slept hard. A bomb could go off and he wouldn't know. Anyways, fluids just don't stop coming. I can't feel my legs, and I have no idea where my phone is, so I start shouting in between dry heaves and, well, Poseidon crawling out of my throat. Luckily, my neighbors heard me and called an ambulance. That ride was hell for every single one of us. My poor EMTs had to go home, shower, and I'm sure get tested for whatever it was I had, all while hoping they weren't gonna die. Fast forward to the hospital, they gave me meds to stop stomach spasms and anti-nausea medications along with pain meds for my acid-ridden esophagus and sore muscles. After all the tests, it turned out I had the flu, not the scary part, and no electrolytes, cue back to only having water after a point, on top of being severely dehydrated. The blood was just my pissed-off colon. A lack of electrolytes can do some pretty scary crap, pun intended. Story 6. I woke up in the morning to get ready for work, bent to tie my shoe, and when I stood back up, the sight in my right eye was entirely gone. I did the usual thing of blinking and shaking my head a little, thinking maybe blood rushed to my head weirdly or whatever, but it wouldn't come back. I tried to explain to my partner that I was in trouble, but when I spoke, the wrong words kept coming out. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I definitely said tree instead of hospital at one point. I figured I was having a stroke or an aneurysm had ruptured or something brain tumor, who knows. Whatever the case, I spent the entire ride to the hospital crying and telling my partner over and over that I loved him. It felt like I couldn't say it enough. Turns out I was preparing for my first migraine. Cluster headaches, I don't recommend them, and the migraine aura I get is blindness and aphasia because I'm a lucky girl like that, I guess. Story 7. Once, when I was probably like 5 or 6, my family was at an amusement park. I went on a roller coaster with my mom since I was way too small to ride alone, but I was just barely tall enough to ride at all. This was one of those older coasters made of mostly wood and the security was not so great. Well, on this roller coaster ride, there were corkscrews. During the first loop around, I started to slide out of my seat. The safety strap was not properly fastened and I was very small, so as we continued to loop, I slid further and further out of my seat. I assume at first my mom thought I was yelling from the thrill until she looked over and barely caught me before I flew off the ride. She had to hold on to me while the ride continued for another minute or so before stopping. I was sobbing and my mom was borderline manic, and since we were in the frontmost seat, everyone behind us immediately got out and rushed forward to make sure we were okay. That's the oldest memory I have, and it's not a great one. I think our whole family, 7 of us, got season passes for free after that, because we went suspiciously often after that. Story 8. I've posted this before, but it was still pretty scary. I rode a really twisty roller coaster with my wife and the seatbelt didn't lock or let loose. So I get on the coaster and sit with my wife. We hit the first little set of hills and my upper torso is flailing around like a tube that the air blows into at a used car lot. My wife is yelling and mad at me, thinking I'm doing it to be funny, but realizes that something went wrong. I hooked my boots under the seat in front of me. We're both sweaty now because it's hot, and I'm trying to hook one of my arms on the lap bar. Thank God my wife has strong hands. She's played softball since she was 8 and played in college. And she's freaking out trying to hold me in with her right arm. She pulled my watch off my wrist, gripping my arm and my hand. I'm worried that I'm going to get brained in one of the tunnels. Things slowed down and I had a bunch of images flash in my head. Crap, this is how I'm going to die. My wife grasps my sweaty arm, yelling my name, and I think she was yelling no over and over. At least I had a good run, right? I got married and have 2 great kids. They'll be rich from the settlement of my from being decapitated in one of their tunnels. So we hit the end and I finally got to tell her that there was a malfunction and it wasn't me being the fun guy. I realized my watch is gone and she's pretty shaken from the whole thing. We get the watch and get out. She decided that there would be no more coasters for the rest of the day for me. Story 9. Just last night, my rubber floor mat in my truck slipped onto the gas pedal. There was a line of cars ahead of me at a stoplight, so I pressed the brake to slow down, which caused me to put pressure on the mat, which caused my truck to suddenly speed up. I slammed harder on the brakes and fumbled for the stick to shift into neutral when 2 seconds after my truck accelerated, the mat slipped, allowing my gas pedal to snap back into place. I only knew it was the mat because I tried to pry the gas pedal off the floor but couldn't because my toe was being blocked by the mat. Thankfully, I stopped long before I plowed into the cars ahead of me, but I was seriously thinking about crashing into the traffic light pole. At least then, nobody but myself would get hurt. And I was leaving a restaurant after hanging out with some buddies of mine, one of whom was following right behind me. If I'd crashed, he would have seen it and probably been the first to respond. That whole incident ended up giving me a massive anxiety attack that lasted for 5 hours. I cried the rest of the way home and hung out in the slow lane like an old lady. Once I got home, I cried in my mom's arms like I used to when I was a little girl. She told me that happened to her once, and as long as one doesn't pump the brakes but just holds them down, chances are you'd be okay. Still, nothing is scarier than nearing 60 miles per hour in a Nissan Xterra, unsure if your brakes can stop the car if your gas pedal will ever get unstuck, headed straight at a line of stopped cars a block away. Fun stuff. Story 10. I was recently in a super old British play. I was told to put lube in my hair to slick it down. Lube works better than gel. All the other guys also use lube, so after the show I went home and rested. I decided to shower in the morning because of how tired I was. So I was laying in bed, it was like 11:30 and my head started to itch. It was pretty bad. I couldn't stop itching. My hands then started to itch and I was so uncomfortable I just decided to get up and shower. I grabbed a towel and got into the shower. I cleaned myself but was still insanely itchy. My heart then had this sharp pain. Now I have no clue what was going on. I was just genuinely so scared. I could barely stand, so I sat down, and at this point I was on my shower floor basically convulsing because of these heart pains. It was so hard to breathe, and I was also worried that my throat was going to close. I held myself up and turned the shower off. Keep in mind that I was still so itchy. My entire body was like bright red. My hands were so puffy I couldn't even make a fist. I dried off, ran to my mom and told her what was going on. She tried to calm me down, and I was still convulsing and having trouble standing. I decided to lie down, and after like an hour of constant pain, I fell asleep. The next morning I woke up and my face was just so puffy. I couldn't see when I smiled. I had to perform the play again that morning for the juniors in my high school. I ended up leaving school because I was having heart pains again. No clue why or how this happened. We just never figured it out. Story 11. As a child, I would go bodyboarding at the beach, but only on our summer vacations. Being the excited child I would swim for hours, and one of those times I got super worn out from the surf and sun. I swam out to catch a wave and was sitting there waiting for a good one. I laid down and I shut my eyes. Even though it must have been only a few minutes, though it seemed longer, I drifted pretty far from the beach, way past where waves broke. To my child's mind, it seemed more than a football field, but I'm sure it wasn't that bad. Nevertheless, I couldn't swim well enough to be out there alone, thus I promptly paddled in, scared as all get out. If I had fallen any more asleep, where would I have ended up? But this is the part, less than 10 miles up the coast, there was a shark attack hours earlier. I wonder if I would have been in one piece when I woke up. Story 12. I took an edible before a flight from Portland to San Francisco. I proceed to get very, very high, both metaphorically and literally. The plane begins its descent, and as it does this, it seems to take a steeper angle than usual, and I notice the engines seemingly turn off or stop making as much noise. In my paranoid, stoned mind, I become convinced that the engines have failed and we're going to crash. I begin composing my last text to send out to my family and friends, saving them all as drafts, and then 20 minutes later I notice that none of the flight attendants are worried at all and still smiling and joking. And this is when I realize that the plane was not in fact crashing and I'm just an idiot high. Story 13. I don't do drugs, but years ago my pothead cousin convinced me to try some really potent bud brownies. I love brownies, so when he handed them to me, I ate the whole thing. When he turned around and asked what happened to the brownies and the look on his face when I told him I ate it all, I knew I was screwed. I spent the next few hours going in and out of consciousness, and every time I woke up, I'd either be throwing up or begging my cousin to take me to the ER. He was so high that all he did was cycle between moments of laughing at me, pantomiming, playing sports, and checking if I was dead. I know now that I probably wasn't close to death, but I 100% felt like I was. Story 14. 3 years ago, in 7th grade, I loved orchestra, so I would always rush to it to set up and tune. I get there, and right as I walk in, bam, lockdown is called. I thought it was real because all lockdowns and drills before had been in class, in elementary school. So I hid behind this massive letter holder thing that is about a foot wide that's next to the door, and I sit there. Then I later hear, through the walls, "You check that hall? No, I'll check this hall. You check that one." There's a music hall that splits off from the main one to the gym and workshop, and I thought, they're going to find me and kill me. I didn't know how to lock the orchestra doors. And then, knock, 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 police, open up. I start reaching for a stand to throw at them and the door opens. Hello? And he walks into the middle of the room and it's actually a policeman. Anyone here? He says. Then I finally get up and make my presence known. Turns out it was a drill and that all the other students went into the band teacher's office. He basically called them from his door, then barricaded it with stands. That's my story. Story 15. Kinda embarrassing, but was camping with some friends, poured my heart out to a girl, got gently turned down, then saw her making out with another guy. Everyone else was drinking and having a good time, and I felt like I didn't even exist. My buddy had given me his Bowie knife when he started drinking, as I was the only one who wasn't gonna drink. He felt it was safest in my hands. All I could think of was to plunge that knife into my arm and carve myself up. I'd been battling depression and suicidal thoughts for a while, and that night, it just all came to a head. And that night, I had the opportunity. I could have walked away from the group without being noticed, walked into the woods, and done it. I had a big, sharp knife. It would have been easy. I thought about it for a good while and finally decided I was going to do it. So I started to walk towards the woods, hand on the handle, when one of my friends called my name and asked where I was going. I stopped where I was and tried to come up with an answer, said I was going to take a piss and that I'd be right back. He said, "Okay, man, don't get lost." I went a little further, long enough to pretend I'd peed and made my way back. My friend with the knife offered me a shot of Jack Daniels, which I accepted and finished with 2 cans of Coke. Afterward, I asked if I could store his knife in his truck because now that I'd had alcohol, I didn't feel comfortable with the knife. Truth was, having that friend notice me walk away made me decide I didn't want to die after all, but if I had that knife, I might try again. I don't like to think what would have happened had my friend not seen me. I want to say that if my story touched you or you feel in any way close to how I felt, please, please know that you aren't alone and that there are plenty of good people who would be willing to help you. There are all kinds of resources available, so please don't go through this alone. I wish everyone who sees this all the very best, and I give you all my love. Story 16. A friend and I were longboarding casually in the street. We went down a slope. It wasn't a big deal, the kind of street you wouldn't even consider a danger. I'm a big wuss, so I was going down very slowly, rolled a bit, then stopped and repeat. My friend yelled to get out of the way and went by me like a bullet. At the bottom, he slipped and fell on the street. So I ran up to him to see if he was okay, teasing him in the meanwhile because I thought he would maybe just be a bit bruised. As I got closer, I realized he wasn't conscious. By the time I got to him, a pool of blood came out of his ear and surrounded his head. At that moment, I thought he was either dead or dying. Then he woke up and it didn't make sense. He didn't recognize me and he kept yelling he was in pain. He looked like a scared animal. At that point, I thought he was a vegetable now. The ride and night at the hospital were a nightmare. He turned out all right after being taken care of in the hospital for a while, then at home. He had major migraines for months and lost part of his smell. When he fell, he hit his forehead on the concrete and his skull fractured at the back of his head. I stopped riding my longboard since then. Story 17. When I had a migraine with aura for the first time, I didn't even know this was a thing, but it started with the worst migraine I ever had, followed by me losing my sight and becoming dizzy and feeling sick. I thought this was gonna be it. I told my sister that I thought I was gonna die. She told me she has those migraines too, brought me a pill specifically for these migraines, and told me to sleep. She stayed with me until I woke up just to be sure. Scary as hell. Story 18. I hit a stopped car going over 65 miles per hour. Spent 2 years in a wheelchair. 6 months of that was learning to walk again. I honestly thought I was going to die in the seconds before impact. I can still clearly see the people in the other car and the other traffic around us. The car was stopped to turn on a highway with no middle turning lane. I was the only one injured though, and I'm still sort of grateful for that because I swear there was a kid in the back seat of the other car. I wasn't the driver, front seat passenger of a reckless driver. Story 19. I was on vacation this past summer, staying at a friend's house. When I started to notice my chest feeling tight, I started to get a fever and feel sick. I threw up and the feeling in my chest started to expand. Felt like it was going to explode, like a balloon being inflated inside of me. I couldn't stand it. I literally felt like at any moment my heart would give out or my chest would explode. Went to the emergency room. Turns out I had a really bad gallbladder attack. But on the drive to the hospital, I was telling my wife how much I love her, and if that she remarries, don't let it be anyone we currently know. Story 20. I was really sick when I was 12, missed a whole semester of school. I was throwing up every day and had no energy. Doctors couldn't figure out what it was. Had test after test, visited specialist after specialist, and still nothing. All we did know is my liver wasn't functioning. I was pretty jaundiced, and I was pretty sure I would die before we knew what was wrong. It's hard to explain, but I came to terms with it, like I was more comfortable with death as a concept when I was 12 than I am now at 25. Turns out it was my gallbladder. They had it checked for gallstones early on, but that wasn't the issue. My particular malfunction didn't show up on an ultrasound. The bile duct in my stomach didn't form correctly from birth, and it was hindering complete bile drainage, leading to sepsis in my gallbladder and liver. After one surgery and 2 weeks of bed rest, I was back to normal.
What's your "I was the only one to get away" story? Story 1. Hotboxing a truck with some friends of a friend senior year in an empty parking lot of some park, already baked as hell, when suddenly the Taco Bell we gorged on earlier is going crazy in my bowels, and holy crap, I need a bathroom. I ran and stumbled my way to the public restroom on the other side of the parking lot. I finish, and as I'm about to walk out, I see what looks like red lights illuminating the entrance. I start losing my mind. I know it's cops and everyone's high as a kite. At this point, I knew A, my friends are screwed, and B, what the hell should I do? I retreated to the farthest stall and texted my parents saying I was crashing at some dude's house. Ended up falling asleep in the stall. Woke up the next morning and I got another friend to pick me up. Got away, no one ratted me out. And that's how Taco Bell simultaneously destroyed and saved me at the same time. Legendary. Story 2. Was at a fishing show and we had been following the tour for a while. Undercovers caught my dude rolling a blunt in the car. Then the other dude with us was coming by. I'm throwing as many "get out, son" looks I can, but they popped him for having pills when he came by. So everyone I was with, including the dude who owns the car, got arrested. Thousands of miles from home. As the smartest in the group is getting cuffed, he asks the cops to give me his keys and their tickets. So I had a pocket of concert tickets, a car that isn't mine, and like $100. Took the car, bought a couple of 100 bottles of water and a few 30 packs, and went back to the concert. Sold all of the water for $1 each. Most of the beers except like 15 or so I drank for $3 each, and scalped every ticket for like $120 each. Showed up at the jail with a random girl from the concert, blacked out drunk, and bailed my friends out in all ones. Then bought them a hotel room. I can't leave my people behind, man. You are the type of friend they talk about for ages. Story 3. Drunk with a few friends walking through the docks and trendy bar area and see an industrial building with a tantalizingly easy climb up to the roof. We climb up on the roof, they recycle plastic. Someone reports burglars on the roof because recycled plastic and trash must be a big target, and cops show up. I casually climb onto a tree that overhangs the roof and quickly pass out, and the cops don't see me. My friends don't rat me out. They get banned for life from a bar in a completely different area of the dock complex because the cops told them they caught them trying to cut a hole in the roof and burgle them. Utter bullcrap. We were stargazing and drunk chatting. Anyway, I wake up a few hours later and ask why they left me up there, and I'm reminded of the whole cop thing and informed they weren't arrested but were banned from a bar. We went to the bar the next day to make a point. Story 4. I'm the only one left from my group of 3 best friends since 3rd grade. The first one hung himself because he was a pain pill addict, and I think the pressure of addiction and owing a lot of people money got to him. Ate a ton of Klonopins and hung himself on his mom's porch with a dog leash. My wife was dating him when I met her, and I always joke about it when people ask how we met. I say she was dating my friend and I stole her, and when they ask if we're still friends, I get quiet and say he killed himself. The second one was a heroin addict. Wrecked his car badly when he nodded off, and he lived. After getting home from the hospital, he shot up again and nodded off while eating cereal and choked. His mom found him blue in the face. He lived, but is a completely different person who will never be independent again. The third one just died recently. He was the most badass person ever. Had so much fun in the life he loved. He was that dude in your social media you lived vicariously through. Badass chicks every month, awesome road trips to Mexico one week and Alaska the next. He loved living the biker life. I couldn't even cry when he died because he died doing what he loved. He had literally said to me that he would rather die on his bike than do anything else. Anyway, this will probably be buried, but it felt good to write. I've been off drugs, except for booze for a while now, and my wife and I are really happy. Glad I made it out of that town alive. Definitely miss my bros though. We had some great freaking times. Story 5. Lollapalooza a few years back. Me and my one friend and about 10 other random kids were walking around the festival looking for a place to hop the fence and sneak in because none of us bought tickets. We finally find an area where there are only a couple of security guards. There were about a dozen of us that hopped on this tall fence at the same time. Little did we know that the Chicago police security tent for the festival was right where we all hopped the fence. As soon as we hopped the fence, about 8 cops came running out of nowhere, and at least half the group was on the ground, the security holding them down immediately. This security firm had some athletic jack types. The cops got the other 4 kids after about a 15-foot intense dash. I swear, kids were getting tackled left and right. These cops and security were literally spearing kids into the ground and shoving their faces in the dirt. It was insane. Me and my one friend made it about another half a block and ran into another fence. This whole time, 2 cops were chasing us. As we were hurdling the second fence, one cop grabbed my arm and tried pulling me down, and I shimmied my way onto the other side. We see one more scalable fence and hop that too. At this point, we realized we're backstage for Eminem, and we head into 2 porta potties backstage for about 10 minutes to hide out, just as the show is starting. We realized the cops have better things to do and probably quit searching for us. We head up the side stairs to Eminem and literally get on the side of the stage. Nothing better than an adrenaline-filled sprint hopping multiple fences and making it on stage with Eminem for free. My friend's Southern Comfort pint didn't fall out of his pocket, so we had that to drink. Nothing beats being 18 without a care in the world. It was like sneaking into prison. Story 6. My friends and I all went out egging houses, then drove ourselves to the police station and everyone was arrested but me. Quite possibly the dumbest story about getting caught by the police I've ever been a part of. Luckily, I was the only one to get away. This was years ago. At the time, I was friends with, well, let's call him Mike. One day, I bought a brand new digital camera and was excited to use it. I met up with Mike at his house and another friend, let's call him Chris, was there, as well as Mike's current girlfriend, Kelly. Now, Mike hated his ex-girlfriend, and after a little while not doing much at Mike's house, he pitches the idea of going to his ex-girlfriend's house and egging it. Should have been a massive red flag for his current girlfriend, huh? Anyway, so we load up into Chris's car and we drive to a local convenience store where Mike purchases 10 dozen eggs on his credit card. We get back into the car and drive off into the next town to find Mike's ex's house. The whole time I'm just playing with my camera and taking pictures, which ends up being both a good and a bad thing, but we'll get to that later. Anyways, we drove by her house a couple of times with Chris, Mike, and Kelly all throwing eggs while I just took pictures. After hitting the house a couple of times, we still had a ton of eggs left, so we basically just drove around throwing eggs at random houses and random cars. Not me though, I was just having fun playing with my new toy camera. So a little while later, we notice there's a car right in our ass. Chris starts driving faster, the car speeds up as well. Mike suggests going up on back roads to get away from the car, so we do. The car follows, still right in our ass. At this point, Kelly's freaking out and crying. Mike decides that we should probably call the police to help us with this nutbag chasing us around town. Yeah, a dumb idea. The police, who had already been contacted by the car behind us, informed us that the best way to scare the car off would be just to drive to the police station. So we do. Yeah, obviously this person ends up being someone we egged. We showed up and the cops all run out and start accusing us of egging, and the people in the other car are accusing us of egging. There is egg all over Chris's car from accidental splashback and such, so the only thing Chris or Mike thinks of to say is, "No, we got egged. Look at our car." At this point, another cop pulls up in his cruiser and he just shouts at us, "Which one of you is Mike such and such?" And Mike is like, I am." And the cop then says, "Oh, so you're the dumbass who bought 10 dozen eggs on your credit card before you went out egging, huh?" Damn, no way out of this one. One of the cops sees my digital camera, he asks to look at the pictures, and me being young and dumb and not knowing if I had to give it to him or not, get all freaked out and just hand him photographic evidence of our entire night out egging. Mike gets arrested. They, for some reason, check Chris's trunk and they find a bunch of booze. At the time, Chris was underage. This was probably about 8 to 9 years ago. I was probably 20 at the time. Chris gets arrested. He's crying. The cops see pictures of Kelly egging. She gets arrested. I tell them that I was just taking pictures the whole time. They look through my camera and see picture after picture, and believe me, I am the only one not to get arrested for the dumbest event in human history. We egged tons of houses. I photographed the event as evidence for the cops, and then we literally drove ourselves to the police station where we were all arrested. I was insanely scared and convinced I was going to get arrested as well. Nope, stopped hanging out with Mike and Chris after that. No thank you. I don't need to egg anyone's house. I don't need to get arrested doing dumb stuff like that. Story 7. I was the only one to get away from my hometown. Even the kids who went to college out of state moved right back. I was one of 4 in my class who took early graduation. Graduated high school with a diploma in hand at the end of January instead of June. Even though, due to how the school changed class scheduling, like 90% of the senior class was eligible. We went from a possible 7 credits a school year to a possible 10. The change happened in our junior year, so since we all came in under the old schedule, we still only needed the lower credits to graduate. I remember on my last day in January, everyone was talking in homeroom like, "Did you take early grad?" No, me either. Wish I did, but I'd miss everyone. This was the school, town, teachers, jobs, and people they said they utterly detested and couldn't wait to get away from. They're all still there, now with apartments and kids, still saying how much they hate it and wish they could move away. Story 8. I was a stupid kid who tried to make his own fireworks and accidentally created what amounts to a small pipe bomb, which went off in my parents' house while they were home. I got grounded and missed a camping trip, which nearly killed my buddies. I was the kid who always got caught. It wasn't that I was a bad kid or anything, but every time I even joked about doing something, I got caught. This story is no different, but for once, it worked out in my favor. Some backstory. The time was the early 90s, and several of my friends had planned a camping trip. For some reason, we'd all become fascinated with fireworks around this time. We'd all grown up on a steady diet of 1980s action flicks with cool explosions and such. At that time, the state of Kai outlawed anything stronger than a sparkler, and those just weren't cutting it, so we decided we'd make our own. Remember, this was all before the internet, so we really had no clue what we were getting ourselves into. I won't relate the process I used, even though there are probably far easier ways to make what I did available online. Let's just say I had no idea how powerful the propellant I'd made for my homemade metal-encased flare was. I also had no idea how touchy the stuff was either. I was screwing the cap onto it in the house with my parents and sister home when, boom. Miraculously, I managed to avoid serious injury, other than some singed hair and some temporary hearing loss. The pieces of the metal canister looked like a solo cup that had been run over by a lawnmower. My father was completely deaf in one ear and wore a hearing aid in the other. The noise my flare made when it went off was the only thing he heard in stereo for years. My mom complained later that it made her ears ring several rooms away. My family all came running toward the room I was in, yelling, wanting to know if I was okay. And I didn't reply because I couldn't hear them. I was still laboring under the delusion that I might be able to hide what I'd done. Clearly, I was wrong. My dad had a voice like a drill sergeant, and he was about as worked up that night as I ever saw him. Even so, I could barely hear the royal weapons-grade extra-strength chunky style spittle flinging and chewing out that he gave me. He practically peeled the wallpaper, and I'm sure at least a third of it was illegal in 7 states, or so my sister told me later. She still looks a bit shell-shocked whenever the subject comes up. Anyway, I got grounded, good and proper. Consequently, I missed our little camping trip. My buddies went without me since it looked like I was going to be grounded until the return of Halley's Comet in 2061. It all started out well. The weather forecast called for unusually warm weather that weekend. They loaded up and went out in the middle of nowhere, then hiked way back into the woods to set up camp. By then, all of them had heard of my plight and decided to ditch the homemade fireworks. All but one, that is. He lost all the hair on his right forearm and partly of his beard and ruined a perfectly good jacket. That night, a free cold snap rolled in, and they nearly froze to death, especially when someone put too much wood in the fire and melted a hole in the tent. Not only did this make for a drafty tent, but it also meant they ran out of firewood before the night was over. They ended up having to hike back to the truck in the dark with a couple of cheap flashlights. This is when it started to rain. The two who had to ride in the bed of the truck got hurt when the driver couldn't see a dip in the road and nearly threw both of them out. When they finally did make it out, they ran low on gas and had to sit in the gas station parking lot for a while until it opened before they could finish the drive home. Every last one of them ended up sick as a dog. Meanwhile, I was at home safe and warm. Story 9. I wasn't the only one to get away, but I was in the fewer than 10% that got away. Used to street race in and right after high school. One night, we were at one of the quieter locations and we got an alert that cops were heading in from one direction. We all book it to our cars and start heading out the way that wasn't being closed in on. Suddenly, cars are e-braking and flipping 180 degrees in the middle of the road in front of us, and we see a wall of cops advancing. Freaks closed us in. They herded us into a big parking lot, and I'll never forget watching 30 Honda Civics drive around in panicked circles like frightened wild animals. At the time, I was 17 and only had my permit, and I had sneaked out, so getting caught was not an option. I saw a couple of the less lowered cars hop a curb in the back of the parking lot and book it across a dirt field, so I joined them. I had just enough clearance to make the curb, so there were maybe 6 other cars and myself doing 60 miles an hour across this empty dirt field. Came out in a residential neighborhood I had never seen before, and it took me 30 minutes to get out. But I didn't get caught. One of my buddies did, and he got his car impounded, an $800 fine, and his parents were pissed. No regrets. Story 10. Here's my crazy story. So my freshman year of college, me and a couple of buddies ended up getting a house together. Mistake 1. We would routinely host parties that would become way too out of control to handle. One night, we were having our Halloween bash thing and planned on having maybe 100 to 150 people. So beforehand, we decided to go in on a couple of ounces of weed and make brownies or smoke until we couldn't see. We ended up getting so stoned that we forgot we were having people over, as well as the fact that we had made weed brownies. 11 p.m. rolls around and there's a knock on the door. We were all freaking out thinking it was the cops, so nobody went to the door. About 2 minutes later, someone walks in from the back door, which we had apparently left unlocked. Turns out to be a good friend who's there for the party, along with 20 other people. So they head to the basement to get drinking and whatnot. This literally happens once every 5 minutes until we have a line out of the front door and into the street. At this point, I am way too high to want anything to do with this, so I'm sitting on the couch watching a documentary on ancient aliens on Netflix, which turns out to be a turn-on to drunk slut. No idea. This continues for about 2 hours uninterrupted until I get a call from a friend of mine, saying there are 4 cop cars headed down my street and that he just turned around. So now I'm freaking out. Now I head downstairs and shut the music off and turn the lights on, attempting to explain to this crowd of people that there are cops coming. They're going to be angry and leave. Of course, nobody listens except the guys with warrants who go sprinting down the alley. As soon as I make it upstairs, I hear my roommate yelling, saying not to answer the door. The police are here. So my first instinct is to try and hide, but then I remember the wheat brownies. I grabbed them out of the fridge and darted upstairs as fast as I could to our attic entrance. The way our attic was set up was that it was accessible via what looked like a regular closet door, but actually it was freaking Narnia, and that's where I wanted to hide. I got in the attic, and we had moving boxes in there, so I made a fort out of them, and kinda just sat in there listening to everything that was going on, eating an entire pan of brownies. Mistake number 2. The cops ended up clearing the house after some drunk moron let them in. They gave practically everyone underage a ticket, leaving breathalyzer strips all over the house. They gave so many tickets I could hear them joking about running out and going back to the cruiser for more. 2 of the girls that got underage were actually Norwegian tennis players on scholarships, who also had to get their stomachs pumped. They are no longer playing tennis. After they had cleared the house of the partygoers, they had all my roommates in the living room yelling at them about how many times they've come out here and about how it always smells like pot. And I hear at the bottom of the stairs, "If there's anybody up there, come down right now." And I'm crapping my pants. Then the footsteps. At this moment, I am literally melting into the floor, drawing parallels between myself and the story of Anne Frank. The cop opens the attic door and shines his light in, but I'm hiding like a damn ninja and probably says to himself, "Hell, I'm not looking that hard." Long story short, all my roommates ended up spending the night in jail for various drugs and drinking and maintaining nuisance, whatever the cops could think of, and I spent my night hiding in the attic, which to this day we refer to it as Anne Franking. Story 11. Started racing. I was winning, cop lights came on, my friend stopped, and I kept going. A few minutes later, I get a call from my friend. "Friend, the cops want you to come back." Me. "Oh, no." Friend. "He says you'll get it an hour later." Me. "I guess I'll get it later then." Parked my car down the street from my house. A friend came and picked me up, and we went to his place to play Xbox. I felt kind of bad that he got a ticket and I didn't. Story 12. I went to a private high school and was part of a group of about 20 people who knew about a tent hidden in the woods behind our school. People would go there and hook up after school, smoke pot, and do hood rat stuff. Someone got in trouble and ratted out all of us in an attempt to lessen her punishment. Apparently, she was going to be expelled. And on the last day before finals, we all got called down to the detention room, and the dean told us that they had found drug paraphernalia and weapons, airsoft pistol, and made us all write down everything we know about the tent and who we've seen at the tent. 19 people ratted out everyone in that room, including themselves. We were given pretty harsh punishments. 3 were expelled. Some were suspended into the next year, and the rest got demerits. I wrote down, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Went and talked to the deans and said the same thing, and was off the hook. I'm certain my name was on every list, and I'm sure they wanted to nail me, but I denied, and I guess they were satisfied with 19 people giving themselves up. Story 13. I was gambling in Vegas on a Friday, with a friend's bachelor party coming up the next day. Playing blackjack, mostly just killing time waiting for dinner, but the table was on fire. It was a full table shortly after I sat down. I played for a couple of hours, and the table was all up on money anywhere from $50,000 to $800. The $800 was me. Everyone else was literally up at least 10 grand. It's about 20 minutes before I'm supposed to meet up with someone, so I call it and head back to my room so I can shower and change for the night. head out for dinner, and have a good night. The next morning, my buddies call me down to the lobby to meet up. As I get down there, out of sheer coincidence, they're talking to the dealer that was at the table when I left. She says, "There he is," and points at me. Friends are like, "No shot." Turns out, I was the only one that walked away from that table with $1 to my name.
Serious. People who have survived a murder attempt by dumb luck. What's your story? Story 1. I was around 20, 21 years old and walking home at about 3 a.m. after a night out. I was absolutely plastered from drinking so much, but I was only about 200 meters from my house when a hooded figure jumped out from behind a bush and immediately had a knife pushing into my stomach as he grabbed my neck and tried to pull me in. Fortunately, I was stronger and pulled away. He lunged at me with a knife when suddenly he stopped, stared for what felt like an eternity, was probably a second or two, and then said, "Holy crap, I haven't seen you in so long. My bad, mate," and then walked off as if nothing had happened. I still don't know who he was to this day. Story 2. Thank God for my nosy neighbors. I always used to hate how nosy they were, until this happened. When I was about 10, I was riding my bike outside. My parents always let me ride my bike outside during the summer, but only up and down the street we were on. One day, a man in a van was parked across the street. He called me, asking if I had seen his dog and could help him find it. Me, being a dumb child, offered to help him find it, and I started walking towards his van. My neighbor, an older white lady, came bolting out of her house, hooting and yelling, telling the guy to back off. So the dude gets back in his car in a hurry and takes off, and it wasn't until many years later that I realized how bad that situation could have actually been. Story 3. When I was about 10, my grandfather was dying from complications of his heart issues and mental deterioration. I didn't know him very well, as the last time we had been in contact was when I was a baby. My father never liked him and didn't bother coming with me and my mother to visit him in the hospital. When we got there, he was resting peacefully, and my mother went forward and whispered some words to him. I imagine his current state of health. I hung back a little bit because the creepy old guy, whom I didn't recall seeing in my whole life, really freaked me out. Regardless of my anxiety, my mom said I should approach Grandpa and share some nice words with him. I understood by how sad my mother was that I shouldn't argue too much, so I approached his hospital bed to speak to him. He didn't seem conscious at all, so I just did what my mother did, leaning forward and whispering some nice things to him. Things took a turn when, mid-sentence, his eyes flared open and he stared at me, making me stop what I'm saying. My heart dropped into my ass when he looked at me because it was pure hatred in his eyes. As soon as we made eye contact, he bolted upright from his bed and wrapped his hands around my neck and started throttling me as hard as he could. I barely even remember what happened, but my mom was screaming for a nurse. Grandpa kept yelling at me, and then he died. Almost as fast as it began, it was over. His grip loosened and he flatlined. My mother was inconsolable, and I was extremely confused and crying out of sheer trauma at the situation. Later, after we managed to calm down, a nurse explained to my mother that his severe dementia had left him barely coherent, and it was likely he had thought I was someone else. I didn't learn this until several years later, but my mother suspected my grandfather saw my father. Story 4. My dad has a client who owns a number of fast food restaurants. So one day, we were working at one of his stores, remodeling and talking about robberies. The client told us that when he was just getting into the fast food business, he lived in Colorado. He was an assistant manager at a chain that required him to wear a tie. So an addict came into the restaurant to rob them and grabbed him from behind. He opened the register and the guy attempted to slit his throat anyway, except the knife was dull and he couldn't cut through the material of the tie. The client began to fight back and escaped with minor injuries. The addict went to prison and apparently he has a tie in a frame at home. Story 5. I was a bouncer at a club in LA for a brief period in the 90s. One night I stopped some guys who were clearly affiliated with a gang at the door after they had refused security checks. They threatened me for a few minutes before leaving, spewing all sorts of warnings. Later on, things started to wind down, and since it was a little slow and we were overstaffed, I started drinking. I got a bit drunk, not wasted, but sleepy buzzed, so I told my buddy that I was going to lay down in the back of his car for a while. A few minutes after lying down, I realized I had to pee. I got out and stumbled a few steps into a spot between a guard gate for a parking lot and a building for a little privacy. There were a dozen people milling around in front of the club. I was about 25 feet away from the club's entrance and just off an alleyway. So while I was relieving myself, a guy ran past me around the guard booth to my rear and unloaded a 9mm, recovered rounds from the backseat, trunk, roof, and bumper into the backseat of the car I had just crawled out of. Bam, 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 he unloaded into the car. He He then turned, ran right back past me and down the alley into the night. I don't think he saw me at all. Nothing really came of it except my partner was convinced I was a marked man and refused to be near me for a year or so. And this was LA. I was about 25 years old, almost 50 now, so some specifics are long gone. But I remember this. My buddy was genuinely terrified by this. I don't think he knew anything about it. In fact, he seemed to interpret the event as a larger conspiracy to have me snuffed, not some random pissed off dude making a point and getting jumped in. And because he ditched the car and wouldn't take my calls, it got left at that. For those concerned about the car, it was like a 1980s rusted out sedan, maybe a $500 car. Details about the slugs and number of rounds fired were relayed to me later by third parties. My friend and I were known in the neighborhood, people were talking about it. Thank you for the well wishes, though. Honestly, this wasn't even the first time I was shot at. It's been a long, strange trip. Also, I try to argue later that it's just as likely the guy was shooting at someone else across the street and that the car just got in the way. But there were holes all through that thing. The back seat had around 4 or 5 holes, another 2 or 3 went into the back window and ended up in the backs of the front seats, and another 2 or 3 rounds went right into the trunk. I honestly don't know if he was a terrible shot or if he hit right what he was aiming for. Story 6. I'm a criminal defense attorney representing a man who had embezzled almost $500,000 from his business partner. He was facing several years in prison, had some of his assets seized by the government, and was being sued by multiple creditors for over $2 million, and was in the midst of an ugly divorce and couldn't see his kids. He had 3 lawyers, criminal, civil, and divorce. He was drinking heavily and using cocaine, and I used to get incoherent phone calls from him in the middle of the night that ranged from threats to crying. One day, he came into my office, but I was in court. My secretary said he was civil, and he went to his divorce lawyer's office and shot him. He was later stopped by the police and wounded in a shootout. He told the cops that he had come to my office to shoot me that day and had also planned to shoot his civil attorney. Story 7. During my undergraduate years, I was abducted at a gas station. The locks on my car were broken, and as soon as I got back in, a strange man forced me to drive him to an ATM. Paralyzed with fear, any sense of reason I had disappeared. He claimed he worked at Wendy's and promised to give me all the Wendy's I wanted if I was generous. On the way to the ATM, he showed me pictures of his daughters on his clearly stolen cell phone. Then a Whitney Houston song came on the radio and he started crying and screaming, "Why do all the good people have to die? Only bad things should happen to bad people." So I withdrew the cash and gave it to him, thinking it was over, but he made me drive him somewhere else. As we passed by train tracks, I thought this was where he would kill me. He asked me what I was studying in school, and I told him biochemistry. "I believe in jet propulsion and all that shit. We are not alone. Aliens are among us," he said. He then made me pull over at a gas station and told me to drive away, sweetheart. I called the cops, did a lineup, and found out that he had done this to a lot of other women, some of whom were less fortunate than I was. Story 8. Mine's not extreme by any chance, but a couple of years ago, my brother and I went to walk the dog at around 11 p.m. We left through the side gate, we live on a corner, and right as we exited, I saw this weird-looking dude at the corner of the footpath walking weirdly towards us. I got bad vibes and told my brother to get the dog and get back inside. This dude was walking kind of sideways and hiding something in his hand behind his back. As I was getting my brother through the gate, the dude said something like, "Oi mate, can I come in? I need a blanket, I'm freezing." I just ignored him and went inside and locked the door. We then got a call from the people who lived 2 doors up. The same dude knocked on their door and their 10-year-old son opened it to see the dude holding a hatchet. Anyway, I'm glad I went with my gut on that one. Story 9. My supposed best friend decided that my wife and I were too perfect. Therefore, it must all be an act and I was obviously abusing her. He was at our house after I made an awesome dinner and we were having fun drinking and singing karaoke. I went to the kitchen to put some glasses away, came back and leaned on the couch with him slightly behind me to the left of me. Then I heard a thunk and felt an amazing amount of pain on the top of my head. He had picked up the whiskey bottle on the table. I was very confused as to what the f was happening. Then the blood started pouring. I didn't want to get blood everywhere, so I went to the kitchen. The dude was pacing back and forth, saying weird shit. I thought about my gun, which was close by, but I wasn't thinking quite straight. He left. I had a huge concussion and still suffer side effects from it. My number 2 goal in life is to live longer than that hat just so I can poop on his grave. Story 10. I, 18 female back then, now 25, was on my way home at night after meeting a friend. My home was just 10 minutes away from the train station. After a few minutes, I felt someone following me. No big deal, I thought, just someone else walking home too. but I started walking faster, and I realized the person behind me was catching up. Weird. In my head, I started to make up scenarios of how to defend myself if the person would attack me. Never would I think of this to actually happen. Well, until I felt something on the back of my head hitting me hard. I went furious. I turned around and attacked the guy. My mind was just full of anger towards this stranger who, what I thought, hit me. We were wrestling until I fell on the ground. He was sitting on top of me, strangling me. I tried to crawl my nails into his eyes as deep as I could, but I started to black out. Suddenly, there was this thought in my head, wake up or you will die. Well, adrenaline kicked in again and I opened my eyes and screamed at the top of my lungs, attacking him again. That helped. He stood up and began to run. I lay there for a few seconds, then I started to run home, still screaming. My mom was already at our door and opened for me because my screams woke her up, or her mother senses, who knows. She immediately called the cops and they could arrest him on the same night. It turned out that he actually shot me in my head from behind. They assumed that the gun didn't work properly, the bullet didn't penetrate my skull and got stuck in there, but as far as I know, they never found out why the gun misfired. I'm glad though. He told the cops that he already followed me a few times in the past, but never had the guts to do it. I know, it's a wild story. Story 11. I was exiting a bar once after last call and was with a friend who was a medic. We saw a girl lying in a snowbank near a telephone pole who had just been hit by a car. We ran over and tried to help her. Some others were already on the phone with 911, and I, not having any medical training, didn't have anything to contribute but didn't want to just leave. The whole situation was concerning. I turned around for a second and started to hear people screaming. I turned around and a minivan was heading for us, the few people around this woman. They already started to run, but I was too late. He hit me as I was trying to flee, put the car in reverse, ran over me again, and then went forward and ran over me a third time. Turns out the guy was and drunk and got into a fight with the woman's boyfriend, whom I bore a strong resemblance to. He thought I was him. Not to throw a pity party for myself, but 9 years later, I have a ton of medical issues and my life pretty much started on a downward spiral since then. But for sure, I guess I survived. An off-duty cop watched the whole thing go down and copied his license plate number. He was apprehended 20 minutes later and charged with attempted murder along with many other things. He pleaded out to just 3 years in jail. He had actually killed someone else a few years before, drunk driving. How they thought that was appropriate is beyond me. Story 12. I was 14 and outside in my garage petting my cat. It was November, so it was already dark by 5 p.m. Someone opened the door behind me without me hearing, grabbed me by my ponytail and started dragging me outside. They hit me on my head with a brick and knocked me out. They pulled me halfway around my house when, I'm guessing, they stabbed me. This must have brought me out of my daze because my mom said she heard me scream from inside where she and my brother and sister were in the kitchen. I had 12 stitches, double layer, a severe concussion, and whiplash. I didn't eat and hardly slept for a week. They never found the person who did it. Story 13. Well, my mom got mad at me when I was 20 and I didn't give her money for her birthday, which I'm assuming was to pay off her dealers, so she stabbed me and I had to get it taken out in surgery. Story 14. I was riding on a train across Eastern Europe. I was running low on money, and even though I had been warned that a woman should not be traveling alone in second-class seating, I did not spring for first class. I was sitting alone in one of the compartments that seats 6. This was also a mistake and a very stupid one to sit alone. Eventually, the train stopped and a man got on. He was very drunk. He came into my compartment and I guess he thought I looked like his ex-wife. He attacked me. If it were not for the fact that this particular station was the border between 2 countries, I would be dead. Instead, border patrol from both countries were on the train, and while I was unable to scream, the door was open. At least half a dozen uniformed men jumped on him and saved me. I was in the hospital for a little while but recovered. At one point during the trial, one of the cops asked me if I wanted him and his buddies to hold the guy down while I hit him. I thought he was joking, so I said no and told him to go ahead and do it himself. It turns out they took it seriously and were about to do it. I did put a stop to that at least, but they were so offended that someone from their country would attack a young female American tourist. They were furious with him. So many people there depended upon tourism. Story 15. This all happened many years ago. I was a lead man at a factory when a girl started working there, and I took an interest in her. After a few months, I found out she was in a terrible relationship. Every night, I told her to call me and I'd come get her. Finally, after months, she called me and I came to get her and took her to my house. The guy she was in the relationship with didn't take too kindly to me taking her away. He spent the next 2 years harassing and threatening us. A few months after she and I got married, we went out for a few drinks. Her ex just happened to be at the bar we went to. He apologized to us for the threats and harassment. We were sitting outside talking with a few other people. Next thing I knew, I was on my back on the ground with someone choking me. I tried all I could to get them off of me, but being blindsided and them being on top of me, it wasn't easy. As I struggled to get free, everything went black and then I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. At that moment, I was certain that this was the end of me. I somehow managed to get a better hold of this person's head and yank them off of me. We ran to the car and got away. A week or so later, my wife had been talking to everyone she thought might know what happened. It turns out her ex had paid two people $50 to kill me that night. Story 16. I was doing volunteer work in Central America, working in a really bad area of the capital city. It was a slum built on top of the city's garage dump. The whole place reeked of trash, and there were large metal cylinders coming up out of the ground throughout the area to vent the gas from decomposing garbage underground. As a fellow volunteer and I walked down a dirt path, two men approached us. I'd never seen them before. They were acting strangely, but I just thought they were drunk or a lot of people in the area drank rubbing alcohol to get drunk since it was cheaper than beer or liquor. Over time, drinking the rubbing alcohol would really mess with their brains. As the men got closer, they began acting really friendly, too friendly. One of them came close to me, trying to put his arm around my shoulders. At first, it seemed like the behavior of a guy who gets happy and friendly when he's drunk. However, an alarm went off in my head and I gently but firmly pushed him away. I tried to make it seem lighthearted and playful, like, "Hey man, how's it going?" Affectionate shove. I didn't want to make a scene since I was a gringo. I didn't want to seem like an ugly American. This went on over and over down the whole path. He'd get close, I'd shove him off, he'd come close again. Finally, my friend and I came to a fork in the path and we went one way while they went another. After we got to the house of some people we knew, we told them about the two guys. I was so focused on protecting myself, I didn't even notice much of what was happening with the other guy. They said, "Oh, everyone around here knows him. That's his routine. He comes up to people, pretends to be friendly, puts his arm around them, then pulls out his knife and stabs them in the stomach." I was that close to getting stabbed to death.
What's your "that could have been me" story? Story 1. Back in 2012, I was leaving a gas station on my way to school and let a truck go ahead of me. It was in front of me at the stoplight, and when it was our turn to cross the intersection, an SUV ran the red light going about 45 miles per hour. The truck was totaled. The driver was knocked out and injured pretty badly. I drive a small car, and it scared me to think that if he had it that bad, it could have been a million times worse for me. He's still fighting the person who ran the light because he swears he didn't run it, but I testified for the driver of the truck, and it looks like they're just settling the lawsuit now. Story 2. When I was 16, I was at a beach in Santa Cruz with my family and 10-year-old little brother. My little brother started playing with two little girls who were collecting seashells and stacking them on a giant log near the waterline. My brother walked away to find more seashells, and a few seconds later, a huge wave rolled in and lifted up the log, 1,000 pounds. When the tide receded, the log landed on top of the little girls. My parents aided the rescue efforts, but one of the little girls didn't make it. They could have been my little brother. Beaches still terrify me. Story 3. When I was 7 years old, a man attempted to abduct me outside of my school. It was just me and one other little boy standing there after everyone left. He told me that my mother wasn't going to be able to get me, so she sent him instead. He leaned over from the driver's seat and opened the passenger door, trying to grab me. He also called out several girls' names, trying to guess mine. The boy motioned for me to go with him, but I took a step back to think first. I did remember my teacher saying a few weeks before that a man like this tried to take a little boy who, he said, had forgotten his lunch. The boy jumped out of the car as it drove away. My mom pulled up behind him as I was trying to figure out what to do at the young age. He drove crazy fast out of there. As an adult, I realized it most likely would have had a very violent and sad outcome. When I watch missing kid reports, I think it could have been me. Story 4. My dad went into the bank to make a transaction. I don't remember what, it was a while ago, and I was about 6 or 7 at the time, so I obviously didn't want to stand in the boring bank, so I sat in the car and played Pokemon. A few minutes later, a woman came up to the car and looked in the windows. When she saw me, she began talking, saying things like, "Your dad told me to check on you," even though she came from a completely different building, and kept asking me to come outside. But I said no and eventually told her my dad was coming back soon. This made her quickly say, "Oh, all right, well, bye then," and she ran off. I didn't realize what she tried to do until I told my dad about it. Luckily, I was at that age where they were educating us about strangers, so I knew not to get out. I'm just glad I was smart enough to stay in the car with the doors locked. Story 5. In 2011, at the beginning of my junior year in high school, I had surgery to fix a hole I tore in my shoulder muscle. I had it on the Monday before the national championship air races in Reno, Nevada, and I live decently close. We go every year and have tickets to the box seats. My parents decided I couldn't go because my meds were too powerful. A double dose of Percocet plus a pill to make me not throw it all up. I was in a brace, and if I got bumped, I could have really messed myself up. So I stayed home. That night on the news, we discovered that one of the racers had lost control and crashed into the box seats. I don't know how many people didn't make it. If I had gone, there's no way a d***ed up teenager with one working arm would have survived. Story 6. One morning in the summer that I was 7, I went across the street to play with my friends in their yard. We did kid stuff in the back area by the fence for a while. Then it got hot in the early afternoon, so we went back to my yard to play in the sprinkler at my house. Now, the fence we were playing by was low and open, and even at 7, we could easily see into their neighbor's yard on the other side of the fence. There was a little patio and picnic table just on the other side. Early that same afternoon, the dad of the family snapped and ended his wife and 2 kids. For some reason, he immediately hid them under the picnic table. I'm not saying he would have shot us too, but I remember thinking back then that our decision to go to my yard was very much fate on my side. Story 7. As a kid, my friend and his parents took me to an Orioles home game against the Oakland A's. Our section was empty, so we played around in the seats, running around and decided to just sit wherever we wanted to. Around the second inning, a man with his wife and kids showed up late and asked us to move out of their seats. We complied and just scooted down a few seats to continue to watch the game. A couple of innings later, Jose Canseco drilled a foul ball right into the man's chest. It was pretty messed up and required medical attention. I was sitting in that man's seat before the family arrived. If they hadn't come to the game that day, that would have been me. Story 8. This story is not about me, but about my uncle, who's an electrician. He was working on the top floors of the World Trade Center. My uncle is someone who never calls in sick. On September 11, my grandma convinced him he should stay home because he had a bad cold. Good job, Grandma. Story 9. I worked as a field representative for a real estate broker during the housing crisis. Since the company mostly dealt in real estate-owned REO properties, my job was to ensure that vacant homes were maintained and in good enough condition for sale. As you might expect, empty foreclosed homes in bad neighborhoods don't stay empty for long. So I frequently had to visit these areas and deal with anyone who thought it was okay to claim a new home. It wasn't all bad, but I had seen some stuff. One day, I was tasked with training a new field representative, so I decided to take him to the worst areas on his first day so he would know what he was dealing with. The first house we went to was a 2-story, 2-unit trap house in a rough area of Los Angeles. The front unit was empty, but the doors were busted open and the place was torn up. We tried the door to the rear unit, but it was locked. I knocked on the door, and a woman on the other side asked us who we were. We stated our business, and she unlocked the door. As we entered, a big pit bull came running towards me on the right. Another woman, who was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, sleepily grabbed the dog by the collar and asked what we were doing here. The first woman explained that we were with the bank, and the other woman and the dog went back to sleep. I finally got to look at the woman who had opened the door and saw that she was butt naked and in the process of putting on some clothes. I explained the situation to her. Bank foreclosure, she needs to find another place before the bank comes to do an inspection of their own, etc. While I was talking, the new guy motioned towards a group of about 6 hard-looking men who were making their way towards us. The oldest guy, late 40s, stepped up and asked what we were doing. I backed the new guy off and talked to the old guy about what was going on. The woman was his niece, and she needed a place to stay. I was supposed to kick people out, but I felt bad for the guy and the woman, so I told him that the bank wouldn't show up for a week and that I would delay my rounds until then so that they would have some time to find her another place. He was thankful. We started wasting some time talking about whatever. I found that the best way to deal with rough situations is to treat people with respect and make them friendly towards you. A couple of weeks passed, and by this time, the new guy was working on his own. I got a call that I needed to go back to that house and check it out again. I was 5 minutes away, but at this point, I had already been thinking about quitting and said, screw it. I called up the new guy and told him that he needed to check out the house. He said he was 5 minutes away but would leave in about 10. When he arrived, there were a ton of cops in an ambulance. It turned out that a rival gang had taken out a couple of the guys we had been talking to. The guys who got shot were hanging out in the front of the house when the shooters rounded the corner and blasted them. I quit 2 weeks later. Story 10. This story still messes me up. I was in a mounted convoy in downtown Baghdad. I was the 4th vehicle in a 4 Humvee convoy. The typical SOP, standard operating procedure at the time, during an IED strike was for the 4th vehicle, mine, to pull alongside the dirty side, hit side, of any vehicle that was hit. As my medic jumped out and provided first aid, while my gunner and dismounts provided cover with their weapons. Well, the 3rd vehicle in the convoy got hit no more than 20 meters in front of us and kept rolling. It was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. Instantaneously, there was machine gun fire everywhere. I screamed at the vehicle commander, asking if I should pull alongside the dirty vehicle. He didn't respond. He was in shock. My gunner, a ranger, the best ranger I ever knew, was blasting away at the dudes. He screamed at me to stop. I hit the brakes. About 5 seconds later, another IED ripped through that same 3rd vehicle and it came to a stop. Couldn't see anything. It was like what I imagined hell to be. It smelled like sulfur from the explosives. It went from clear to pitch black instantly. My desk mounts got out and the medic rushed to the hit vehicle. They told me to pull back in my vehicle to protect the scene. No one would tell me what the hell was going on, only that I had to stay in my truck and protect the platoon. They didn't tell me until we got back to the FOB, forward operating base, and the helicopters had flown away that one of my buddies lost his arm. Another had messed up his leg. If I'd moved along the dirty side of the vehicle, that would have been me. I went through a long period of self-loathing and blame. I still deal with it, but I've gone to counseling and gotten help instead of letting it fester and consume me. A lot of dudes in my unit didn't, and it didn't turn out so well for them. The moral of the story for me, I went through some stuff, but I know there are other guys out there who have gone through similar or the same things as me. We have to stick together. If I see someone who needs help, I don't hesitate. I know the signs because I lived through them. Story 11. On one of the last days of the school year, everyone skipped out early. A buddy asked me if I want to go to the beach. He's picking up another friend's jet ski or trailer and then heading out into the water. For some reason, I said no. No particular reason. I guess I just didn't feel like going. He ends up going by himself. By the time I walked from school back home, there was a message from another friend saying that friend 1 is gone. He had been in a head-on collision on his way to pick up the jet ski. Even crazier, the car he collided with was a client of one of his parents, who is or was an attorney. He actually got out of the car and walked towards the other car to see if they were okay, but dropped before he made it all the way to them. Story 12. As a college student, my experience occurred a few weeks ago. I have a class in the liberal arts building that ends at 11:45 a.m., followed by another class in the adjacent building at 12:30 p.m. I usually head to the basement of the liberal arts building and put my phone into airplane mode, since there is no service there. I sit there and do some work until my next class. On one occasion, I decided to get some gum before my Spanish class, which starts at 12:30 p.m., to ensure that my breath wouldn't smell bad when working with partners. At noon, I walked back to my apartment and forgot to change my phone out of airplane mode. While walking back, a police car drove by me, which was nothing out of the ordinary. A minute later, the tornado siren started going off, which I thought was odd, since they tested them at 11 a.m. and it was now 12:13 p.m. My roommates told me that there was a shooting in the EE building, but it didn't register with me. I turned around and headed back out to my Spanish class, which is pretty foolish of me. If there was ever a shooting near you, it's important to stay indoors. The shooter only targeted one victim and gave himself up right away to the police. He surrendered right about the time I started going back to my apartment. So I was out walking during his attack. Had it been a Columbine-style open-fire shooting, I would have been in a large open area, making me an easy target. It was a close call. Story 13. I was on a train on my way to my friend's house and needed to transfer to a different line at a downtown station. I accidentally skipped my stop because I wasn't paying attention and got off at the next one. I decided to walk to the station because they weren't too far apart. As I got closer to the train station, I noticed that there were a bunch of cops and people standing outside. I found out that something had happened to one of the trains, causing the cars to fill up with the smoke. Several people had to be taken to the hospital and they temporarily closed the station. It was the train line I was trying to transfer to, and if I hadn't missed my stop, I would have been on that train. I could have possibly needed to go to the hospital, which would have been bad since I didn't have insurance at the time. Story 14. When I was on a long cross-country trip moving to another state, it was torrentially raining in Louisiana. I had all my belongings in the bed of my crappy truck, wrapped up nicely in trash bags to protect them, and my cab was full of crap as well. Water covered the highway and there were several accidents. I saw a bunch of piled up, burned out car frames in the opposite highway. I felt hungry, so I stopped by McDonald's to get a $1 burger. It smelled terrible there, and the cashier was slow. When I finally ate my burger and jumped back in my truck, I was driving about 5 to 10 miles under the speed limit because of how bad the rain was, as was everyone else. Then I saw an expensive sports car go whizzing past me, going at least 30 miles over the speed limit. I cursed at him under my breath. About 5 minutes later, I was driving over a bridge and saw the same car. It had crashed into several other cars and spun out of control into the bridge wall over a river just minutes before, and everyone was climbing out of their cars in a daze. I'm not really sure if anyone was hurt. If I hadn't stopped to get that burger, I'm convinced that would have been in that pileup, and in the crappy truck I was in, I probably would have been dead. Story 15. My sister is a manic depressive alcoholic. She's overweight, has 2 kids with 2 different men, and does nothing with her life but lives off of other people's money. But still, I love her. She's a sweet person, but I don't want to emulate her. It's sad because when I think about how she used to be when we were children, I know all that she could have been. She was the most popular girl in school and could have had any guy she wanted. Now, I only see her for what she's become. She got to this point because of her manic depression mixed with heavy substance and alcohol use. We have the same mother and father, and in my mind, I struggle with these same manic feelings every day. Most days are good, some days are bad, but I have a wife and friends who love me and keep me grounded. I have a good job, go to school, and try to improve myself every day. I've managed to channel my manic-depressive light version into making myself a productive member of society. I know that part of what gives me my creative edge is that little bit of crazy inside of me, but that edge cuts both ways, and that's what worries me. When I look at my sister, I realize I could have turned out to be like her if I wasn't careful, and I still could if I didn't keep control of myself. I'm lucky to have the life I do, and almost all of that credit goes to my wife for keeping me sane. She's always grounded, but I still walk the razor's edge, and I worry I might end up like my sister if the bad angels of my nature defeat the better ones. Story 16. During my deployment in Afghanistan, I was injured and had to be evacuated by medevac. Before the incident, I was always in the lead vehicle with my team chief. However, after my injury, our team was short one person, so they replaced my team chief with a full team. Less than 24 hours later, the team in the lead vehicle hit an IED, resulting in the deaths of the driver, who would have been me, and the team chief, who would have been him. I never complained about my injuries again. Story 17. My sister and I were waiting at a bus stop after a doctor's appointment for her sunburned feet. Since she was in pain, she chose to sit while I stood at the pole waiting for the bus. A middle-aged man in a small white car pulled over, leaned over his passenger seat, and offered us a ride. Since I didn't recognize him, I declined his offer. He became angry and started screaming at me to get in the car. But I stood my ground and waited for the bus. As I sat down, my sister said that's what I get for looking 15 and alone. I'm 20. It dawned on me that if I had accepted the ride, I could potentially be dead with no witnesses. A few weeks later, a girl at my work and her friend had the same experience at the bus stop. I was glad that I didn't get in the car. Story 18. I left a barbecue or party in a park located in a dangerous area of the North Bronx. 15 minutes later after I left, a gang arrived and held up the entire party at gunpoint. My friends had to walk home barefoot and convinced MTA employees to let them ride the train since they had lost their wallets and cell phones. As a teen, a friend offered me a line of narcotics that he had just bought. He bragged about what a great deal it was. I declined, telling him that I had homework to do and wanted to be sober when I saw my girlfriend later that day. She was pretty clean and would not have appreciated me being under the influence when she came to see me. The batch was tainted, either because it was not cleaned properly or because it was sold as narcotics with a lower lethal dose. My friend took it and died a few minutes later. Story 19. Once in first grade, I let a kid cut me in line, and he got the lucky tray. The ice cream he won should have been mine. Story 20. I went to Taco Bell with mom and a friend, and I said I would just share with him, even after being told that mom would buy me one, no problem. The next guy in line got a drink. He won a $40,000 Land Rover in the cup contest.